Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I talked a lot about fears last week, and I'm going to continue on PTSD, but I'm going to take a short break from PTSD and go into defense mechanisms because I think it's a good prelude to what PTSD really is. And so as we talk about the fears and the things that we have dealt with, people have a traditional way of handling stress in their lives. And there are about 10 ways. It depends upon who you read, because sometimes it's categorized in a little different way. But there's about 10 ways that people traditionally react to stress in their lives. Not everybody reacts in the same way. What might be stressful for you isn't necessarily stressful for me. What puts you into a panic might not necessarily put me in a panic. But on the other hand, I might react to something that you hardly pay attention to. So we do have stress in our lives, and we react to our stress in individualized ways. And these ways are called defense mechanisms or adjustment mechanisms. These are the traditional ways that you handle stress. You don't use all of them. You tend to specialize in maybe 2 or 3, and you don't even make the choice of what you specialize in. And I say specialist with quotes around it. It's not like you sit there and say, gee, I think that I'll stress out and work harder today, or I'll rationalize today, or whatever it is. Your body does it. And you just kind of follow along with what your body is doing. And so we want to find out what they are. And I think it's important because when you get to PTSD and other real stresses, your personality plays a part as to how you react. If I don't react to something that bothers somebody else, somebody screaming in the hall or whatever, if I don't react to that, then if I have a lot of stress and if I'm exposed to PTSD or exposed to some kind of abuse, I might react to it completely differently than what somebody else reacts to it. But at any rate, we as individuals and our bodies react to stress in our lives in traditional ways. And I'm going to read them off, and then I'm going to go into them one by one. For some of us, it's working harder. For some, it's a compensation. And of course, as I go along with this, I'll be defining those terms. Rationalization, attention getting, identification, projection, repression, daydreaming and dissociation, regression, and withdrawal. Those are the major ways that we react to stress, but we don't use all of them. Our bodies tend to lean toward maybe 2 or 3. There may be one that we use to the exclusion of others, and it's just our body's way of handling stress. Now, what would determine what the body does? Well, I think it's a matter of personality. It's a matter of biochemistry. It's a matter of how our bodies are working. And for me, it might work in a certain way. For somebody else, it might work in another way. You know, I had a lady come to me, and she was panicked. She was afraid because she had heard something about the planets all lining up in a certain way, and that meant that something horrible could happen or the end of the world was near. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that stuff, but of course I am interested, and if it's on the news, I watch it. But she was very panicked about it. What happens if the world gets too stressed and all these planets with their gravitational forces do something to the Earth so the Earth blows up? Well, it didn't bother me at all, but she was in a state of stress about it. So I said, you know, the world's going to end in the way that God has predicted in the Bible that it's going to end, and I'm not going to stress about it. I don't think you have to worry about it, and if it happens, it happens. God has it in His control. If it doesn't happen, well, it's another theory that has been proven to be wrong. So I went about it in that way, and she calmed down. Well, let's look at these defense mechanisms, also called adjustment mechanisms, and see what they are. And as I describe them one by one, you probably will be able to pinpoint the ones that you use. And as I said, it's not like you pick them. It's not like you say, this is the one I want to use. Your body does it for you. It's just a matter of interpersonal way that your body functions. So we'll start first with working harder. And this is if your goal is unsuccessful, if you can't reach your goal, if you're not doing what you want to do, then what's going to happen is that you're going to work harder to meet your goal. I had a friend of mine, when we were in college, I graduated with her in high school. There were a group of us that graduated together, and we all went off to college, and some of us went to the same college, including this girl. I'm going to call her Mary, but I'm not sure that was her real name. So we all went off to college, and Mary flunked out. She just couldn't do the work. She wasn't gifted in academics. She was a wonderful girl. She was a wonderful friend. We loved her dearly. We always included her in everything. But college just was not for her. So what did she do? She went back to college a second time because she had to do what we were doing. We were her friends, and she wanted to have a college education as we were getting a college education. She flunked out for a second time. Well, what did she do again? She got admitted for a third time. And wouldn't you know, she flunked out. She thought every time she went back, she could do the work. I'm going to try harder. I'm going to work harder. And that's exactly what this defense mechanism is. We're going to try harder. We're going to work harder. And it didn't work. And she still flunked out. So eventually she got the idea that maybe she should be doing something else. And so she went into some kind of a training program in which she was successful. College is not for everybody. But if you are used to using work and effort, you may not have pinpointed this is a defense mechanism. But it really is. And what you're trying to do is when you don't reach your goal, you try harder to reach that goal that you haven't been able to reach. Now, sometimes it works with a lot of extra effort. Some people can do things that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. But that's the defense mechanism that they're using. Increased work and effort. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Now, I also want to mention that most of these defense mechanisms have a beneficial part and maybe a part that's not so beneficial. And some of them are worse than others in terms of mental health. Some of them are better than others in terms of mental health. So I want to keep an eye on and mention to you, work and effort is considered to be pretty healthy. However, if it gets to the point where you get stuck in it and you keep doing the things over and over and over and over because you've just got to do it, even though you can't, and you keep failing and failing, then this turns out not to be a good defense mechanism for you. But for many people, it is very helpful. So on a chart of good or bad, we'd have to put this in the good part. Okay, that's working harder. Compensation is the next one, and I'm going to spell it, compensation. And basically what it is, if you are unsuccessful in something, then you do something else. And it's basically pretty healthy. I know if my friend Mary had decided to do something else before she flunked out of college 3 times, she probably would have been better off from a mental health standpoint. But the thing is also, you don't want to quit too soon. If you have a goal, and the goal is really important to you, then you don't want to quit too soon. You need to give it a good, fair shot. But if it doesn't work out, it is time to think about something else, to do something else instead. And that's all right to do that. It's considered to be a pretty healthy defense mechanism. Now, the next one would be rationalization. And that is like a good excuse or an explanation for poor behavior. Let's say you're doing something and it's not right. Well, what are you looking for? You're looking for justification for why you did it. I look at these people on these shows and they question them, well, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. And they're always thinking of a way why it was better to do that than something else. So in rationalization, you have a good excuse. Now, what's the difference then between a rationalization and an excuse? In an excuse, you know it's an excuse. Oh, I did not get my homework done because the dog ate it. Or some stupid thing like that. I decided that I wanted to do this instead of that, and you have an excuse for doing that. And the excuse may be pretty lame. I didn't want to go to somebody's concert because I was busy at a meeting, when maybe there really wasn't a meeting. And so there it goes. It's an excuse. That's an excuse. And the excuse may sound plausible, but you know it's an excuse. You know it's not the real reason. In rationalization, you tend to believe what it is that you're saying. And that makes it more of a defense mechanism because you're believing what you're saying. I hear people say things all the time, and I'm thinking, where do they come up with that? That can't possibly be true. But if it is true to them, then it is true to them. You have to understand that perception is everything in psychology. The way you perceive things is everything in psychology. It explains an awful lot about behavior. If I perceive that there are men from Mars coming down to take photographs of me and I'm psychotic, I'm still going to believe that that's the truth. Everybody around me may say, but there are no men from Mars coming down to take pictures of you. I knew a lady once who felt that there were people from Mars and other places that were hiding in the walls. I used to go over to visit her, and she says, don't you see them? They're in the walls. They're taking pictures of us. And of course, there wasn't anybody there, and I knew that. I worked with a psychotic student when I was a college professor, and he says, I can just see those animals crawling up the curtain. And I'm sitting there with the dean because we had to make a decision as to what we were going to do, since he was obviously mentally ill. And he and I and the dean were talking, and we were talking, and all of a sudden he says, don't you see those things crawling on the wall? And there was nothing there, just the curtains. And so we knew at that point he really was psychotic and he needed more care. The university was not going to be able to take responsibility for him, and he was dismissed. Then he ended up in a mental institution. But that's the kind of thing. A rationalization, he was psychotic. Now, a rationalization doesn't make you psychotic. I was just using that as an example of believing something that might not be true. But in rationalization, you believe what you're telling yourself. In an excuse, you know it's an excuse. You know it's not for real. So it's not necessarily psychotic. You could have all kinds of belief systems in place as to why you did this or why you did that. If it's rationalization, you believe that those excuses are true. And then, of course, if you believe it's true, it's not an excuse. It's a belief system that you have, and it's rationalization as a defense mechanism. Not particularly healthy. If it's not done to extreme, then it's not awfully bad, but it's not the healthiest either. So that's rationalization. Attention getting is the next one. When you are doing things to get attention, why? Because you need attention and you want attention. And that's kind of iffy in terms of how healthy it is. It depends to the extent that it goes. So another thing about these defense mechanisms is if they're healthy or unhealthy, part of it depends upon to what extent they go. Now, in attention getting, you could dress different, you could talk different, you could put makeup on your face. Anything that you could do, you could pretend to be sick when you're not sick, because some people want to be sick, some people want the attention that they get from being sick, some people want to be confused because they want the attention that they get by being confused, and so it's a case of I want attention because I need attention, and the question is, why does a person need that kind of attention? Why would a person want to be sick? Well, because they would get attention from other people, from other family members. So then you'd have to look at the family members. Why do they feel left out? Why do they feel like they have to do something to get the attention of somebody else when somebody else should maybe be paying more attention to them? And if they got the attention they needed, would this defense mechanism stop? Possibly so. I knew a lady who wanted to have dementia so bad that she kept talking to me about her dementia, which she didn't have. And I finally put it to her bluntly, and I said, you know, if you had the dementia that you think you have, you wouldn't be able to talk about it. because you wouldn't have the presence of mind to be able to talk about it. Do you think that people who have dementia know that they have dementia? Well, they do for a while. A lot of times they do for a while if they're told. If they're not told, they may not even notice. But if they're told that they have dementia, then they're aware of the fact that they are failing. But at some point, it doesn't matter because they're not aware, and that's a part of the dementia process. So attention-getting behavior, doing things to get attention, it can be okay, not harmful, to the bizarre. There was a case of a woman who wanted to be a child because she felt happy as a child. So she disfigured her face and acted like she was like maybe a 15-month-old, a 2-year-old, because that at that point, that was the happiest point in her life. So she started drinking from baby bottles and started soiling herself and doing all kinds of things to try to make herself a baby again, in a sense, just for the attention. That's when it becomes bizarre. Now, identification, trying to be like someone you like. This is a little bit like idol worship, and we see it in children. We expect it in children. I remember picking up my nephew, he's little, and he put his arms in the air and he said, Zorro. He was trying to be Zorro. And I don't know if you remember, this is years ago, he was kind of like a cartoon character. So my little tiny nephew was trying to be like him. As children are growing up, they have role models. And the role models are important. If you are an adult, you are a role model for your child. And it's very important that you be the kind of person that you would want the child to emulate. Because if you're not, then they're going to emulate who you are and think that's okay. They're not going to know the difference. I've heard cases and seen cases where little children were brought in while the adult is robbing a store, and they get caught and they're arrested. So what are the children seeing? It's okay to steal. My mom does it. It's okay to smoke and use drugs. My mom does it. It's okay to have people in the house that shouldn't be there. What's wrong with that? Whatever you do for your child, in front of your child picks up as being normal behavior. They do not have the brain development to discern what is right and what is wrong. And so you need to train them up in terms of what is right and what is wrong. And even the scriptures tell you to do that. So it's important that you be the role model that your child needs to have. A person who's successful, but a person who's kind, a person who's compassionate, a person who helps others, a person who spends time with others. Children need to see that, and then they will become that. A person who is good to animals and good to other people, they need to see all of that, because whatever they put in their brain is assuming is normal. And you've got to remember, children's brains are not developed. They are growing, but they're not developed. And the brain does not really completely develop until the mid-20s. When a child is a teenager, it's especially important that you be a good role model, because the brain is now redeveloping. The brain at teenagerhood is rewiring. So you can't expect a teenager to have a lot of judgment, because the areas of the brain that have to do with judgment and understanding of what happens when you do certain behaviors, the consequences of behaviors, that part of the brain does not develop well until about age 25. So the child's brain is immature, it's growing, it's getting more complex, but it grows in stages, it grows section by section, and the growth is not complete until about age 25 or mid-20s. They're not going to be mature, and when they start being teenagers, the brain rewires itself. And so it's almost back to square one. So the role modeling is extremely important, but with the identification identification, sometimes you just love somebody or like somebody intensely. It may be a person that you know. It may be a person that you don't know. It may be a person that you see on television and you want to be like them because you like the way they are on television, and you just assume that what you see on television is the real person. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but we won't make a judgment here about that. Depends upon the person. But it also could be a person in history. You might really like a person in history that you want to emulate for some reason. And so this is this almost idol worship or identification. In a child, it would be idol worship. It's identification as a defense mechanism, and you try to be like them as much as you can. If it's a person that you know or you're aware of, you can go to the point of trying to look like them, adopt a similar hairstyle, try to be in the same career as they have, try to live the same life as they have, and dress like them, talk like them, be like them, do things like them, have the same hobbies, have the same politics, and so forth. Now, that's going way too bizarre, because the problem is you're not going to be yourself if you are adopting another person and trying to be another person. Then you are not allowing yourself to develop to be who you are as a unique human being. But that happens, and this is where the identification becomes a little too much sometimes. But if you're just copying a person because you like them, because of their attitude about life, or they have the same faith as you, or whatever it is, then a little identification for children growing up is not a bad thing. It's when it gets extensive that it becomes damaging. Well, we're about out of time, so I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue this next time. So please join me then.